All right, before we move on, we're going to do a quick recap of the uses of the infinitive because the next chapter has a bunch of infinitives plus a new way of looking at it. So the first infinitive use that we've seen is the complementary infinitive. If you should run into a wicked vampire in a dark alley, he will greet you with the saying, "Sanguinem tuum bibere volo," I want to suck your blood. And he will be using the complementary infinitive bibere because bibere completes the thought raised by the verb volo. Volo is not a complete idea, I want. Bibere completes it, that's why it is a complementary infinitive. The next use of the infinitive that we've learned is the subject infinitive. That's where the infinitive is acting as a verbal noun, like in this sentence, necessa est mihi sanguisugum vitare. It is necessary for me to avoid the vampire. In this instance, the word vitare is the infinitive, and it is acting as the noun, as a noun in the sentence. And the third is, of course, as the verb of an indirect statement. Dico sanguisugum sanguinem tuum bibere. I say that the vampire is drinking your blood. In this instance, the word bibere is the infinitive, and it is the subject of, it is the verb of this indirect statement. So those are the three uses of the infinitive that you've already seen. And in this chapter, Caesar is going to give us a new use, and this is called the historical infinitive. Now, the cool thing about the historical infinitive is that it looks like all the other infinitives. Basically, when something is in the historical infinitive, it's just translated like a regular past tense. So the historical infinitive is translated like regular past tense, and authors use it when they want to show something was so exciting or harried that they didn't have time to put the verb in the right form. So if we go back to our vampire example, we could just say bibere sanguinem because we're in such a hurry that we don't have time to provide the regular verb form. So we just say, he drank the blood, and we say it so quickly that it just stays in the infinitive. There is our historical infinitive, and you're going to see a few of those coming up in this chapter. Moving on to our Caesar. Tom damum titurius, qui nihil ante providisset, trepidare et concursare cohortesque disponere, haec tamen ipsa timide, atque ut eam omnia deficere viderentur. Quod plerem eis accidere consuevit, qui in ipso negotio concilium capere coguntur. That's a mouthful. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Then finally, Titurius, and remember, Titurius is also the name for Sabinus, who is one of the Roman leaders. So, Caesar gives us a subject here. We don't know what he did yet, but we know that he's in the nominative case, so he's probably going to be the subject of the main verb. And then, of course, qui nihil ante providisset, you are pros at chunking. You should see that this is a relative clause, and it's most likely talking about this guy. So, Titurius, who, this is pretty simple. You can probably pull it off on your own. Just notice that ante is an adverb. So I will leave you to that relative clause on your own. And then we get, look, a historical infinitive. How do we know it's a historical infinitive? Well, it doesn't fit any of the other categories. And since the Romans are in the midst of a hairy battle, having been ambushed by the Gauls, it is most likely that the author would use a historical infinitive to show the urgency of the situation. So Titurius is the subject, and trepidare et concursare et disponere are three historical infinitives showing what Titurius did in a big hurry. He did this, and he did this, and he did this, and of course cohortesque is the accusative direct object of disponere. So he freaked out, he ran around, and he positioned the cohorts. And Caesar is so busy showing us the urgency of the situation that he gives us haec tamen ipsa here. And the problem with this, that will probably confuse lots of inexperienced readers of Latin, is that haec and ipsa, meaning these very things, are accusative, and Caesar didn't give us the verb that governs this direct object. We know the subject is Titurius, but we need to assume that the verb is hidden there, and the verb is something like fecit. So we're going to write that in. Titurius did these very things, however, again, that's understood, however, so timidly, timide there is an adverb, that, so we've got a result clause coming. Titurius acted so freaked out when he was doing all these things that, and then here is our result clause, starting at the ut, going down to viderentur. Notice, eum is accusative, and this is referring back to Titurius. The subject of our result clause is omnia. Viderentur is the verb of that clause. Notice, it's in the passive, and whenever you have video in the passive, it means seem. And then look, we have a complementary infinitive because you seem to do something. So he freaked out so much that all things seemed to abandon him. In other words, all of his senses, everything just seemed to be absent from him, which is kind of a problem because we need a leader, don't we? And then Caesar gives us this quod. And we know that quod can either be which or because. Quod plerem quae eis accidere consuevit. Quod in this instance means which. And the problem is there isn't really a regular stated antecedent. But what Caesar has as the antecedent of this is this entire concept of being freaked out, which, and then that keeps going, that's the subject of consuevit, usually is accustomed to happening, is accustomed to happen a whole bunch to those people. Notice again, we have another complementary infinitive. Let's take a peek. We had one here going with viderentur, and we have one here going with consuevit. So he freaked out and everything seemed to abandon him, which is accustomed to happening to those guys. Plerem is an adverb very much, and to those guys. And then Caesar gives us another relative clause here, which modifies those guys, those people who, oh, you can do this part in ipso negotio. We've got a prepositional phrase, and then we have a direct object. And look, we have a main verb with a third complementary infinitive. Those guys who are forced to capture or get an idea in ipso negotio, in the very business. What Caesar means is in a hurry or in the thick of things. So let's see. Titurius did all these things so timidly that everything seemed to abandon him. All of his capabilities seemed to abandon him, which is accustomed or usually happens to those people very often, those people who are forced to come up with an idea in the thick of things. At cata, qui cogitaset haec posse in itinere accidere, atque ab eam causam perfectionis auctor non fuisset, nulla in re communi saluti deerat, et in appellandis cohortantisque militibus imperatoris et in pugna militis officia praestabat. So, Caesar just got done telling us how Sabinus Titurius acted. Now he's going to contrast this with the other Roman leader, Cata. But Cata, let's see, we've got a qui here, probably starting a relative clause. And it's a long relative clause that goes all the way down to this fuisset. But don't worry, I bet you we can find some chunks to break it up. So, we have who, there's our verb, who had thought, that, because of course you recognize that cogitaset is a kissing verb, a knowing verb, which would of course introduce an indirect statement, who had thought that, and then here is where our indirect statement starts, haec posse in itinere accidere, who had thought that these things, and then here's our infinitive verb, are able, and then we have a prepositional phrase, and then look, another complementary infinitive. Jeezies, Petezies, Caesar, and that's because it has to complete the verb posse. So, Kata, who had thought that these things were able to happen on the trip, so we're still waiting to see, and ob am causam profectionis actor non fuisset, so we're completing that relative clause. Notice ob am causam is a prepositional phrase on account of this thing, and then we have a genitive, which goes with actor, and a nominative here, so we've got a linking verb, who was not a originator of the setting out on account of this thing, but Kata, who did all this stuff, and on account of that, was not the originator or somebody who supported the idea of leaving from the winter quarters. Isn't that awesome? Caesar gave us Kata as a subject and this ginormous relative clause, but we still haven't gotten to the verb to show what Kata is doing yet. We'll have to wait and see. Let's see. Nolla in re communi saluti de erat. Okay, we've got a prepositional phrase here. In no thing. And then we have communi saluti, the common safety, and that is dative. And then de erat, finally we get the verb. Okay, de erat is a weird verb because it takes a dative object. So, Kata was deficient to the common safety in regard to this common safety. He abandoned the common safety, nolla in re, in no way. Wow, Caesar, okay. And he's going to tell us more about what Kata did. We can tell because there's that at there. So, Kata did that stuff, and what else did he do? Well, let's see. We've got a prepositional phrase. It starts here with in. Appellandis, we've got a gerundive, cohortandis, que. So these are two gerundives, but we still need a noun object with our preposition. There it is, militibus. So, he was in calling and encouraging the soldiers. We're still waiting for the next verb because that et is going to connect another verb. Let's see. Genitive imperatoris et impugna militiis officia praestabat. Oh, prepositional phrase here. In the battle. Oh, yay, finally. This is what he does. Kata was presenting or demonstrating the responsibilities, notice this is accusative, of a soldier in the fight. Or, more correctly, he was demonstrating the responsibilities of a general in calling and encouraging the soldiers, and he was demonstrating the responsibilities of a soldier in the fight. So not only was he organizing, ordering, and encouraging guys like a general up here, but he's also fighting like a foot soldier down here. Maybe we should try that one more time. It's a little bit tough. And Kata, that's your main subject, who had thought that this stuff could happen on the trip, and because of this, was not a supporter of leaving the winter quarters. Kata was absent or was deficient in regards to the common safety in no way, and he was presenting the responsibilities of a general in calling and encouraging the soldiers, and he was presenting the responsibility of a soldier in the fight.